Ms. Manning, and now I'd like to recognize Ms. Houchin from Indiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee for having this hearing and to our witnesses. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The Biden border crisis has made every single state, including my state of Indiana, a border state. Every state is now impacted by an open southern border. It doesn't matter if we're in Eagle Pass, Texas, or back home in my home of Salem, Indiana, which is 1,288 miles away from the border. I was able to visit Eagle Pass in Uvalde, Texas earlier this year. I can tell you firsthand, as I'm sure you know, the border is not secure. And I have said to my constituents at home, if the president or anyone else had seen what I have seen and heard at the southern border, they would declare a national crisis and do whatever was necessary to secure our border and restore the sovereignty of the United States. That is certainly a mission that I am on, having been there and seen it firsthand. We're also well aware of the impact our border crisis has had on opioid and fentanyl-related overdose deaths. 220 of my constituents alone have died from drug-related deaths in the last year. What's not talked about enough is the impact of the border crisis on our workforce, so I'm glad we're having this discussion today. Dr. Camerata, you estimate that there are 8.8 million illegal aliens currently in the United States workforce. How did you come to calculate that figure?
Yeah, it's based on data collected by the U.S. Census Bureau on a monthly basis for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's imperfect, but they do attempt to try to capture illegal immigrants, and then they ask questions about, are you working, what kind of job you do. So that's how we can get everybody from Pew to the Center for Migration Studies, the Migration Policy Institute. We all use that data, essentially, that survey and another one, to try to figure out what's going on with the illegal immigration. It's certainly imperfect, and there's a big caveat that I mentioned. The way the survey is weighted, even though I have data through this year, it doesn't take into account the border surge. So all the people being paroled and released, but it's the best we have. So there's probably an underestimate there. I do try to control for that, but I think that's an open question. But it's clear that there's been a surge of illegal immigrants in our workforce if you look at that data.
And I expect these numbers will continue to rise as the crisis at the border continues to worsen when we're continuing to be under what I would consider destructive open border policies. How concerned should we be about further increases in undocumented workers into the United States?
Well, obviously there are many issues, right? And we've touched on some of them, but I am focusing here on the labor force. And again, we have a crisis of non-work. They do not show up at employment. There's this silly, superficial analysis. We have this many unemployed and this many job openings. And look, there's incongruity there. And what do you know? We don't have any workers. And they're ignoring all the people on the economic sidelines. This has been a deterioration for 6 decades for men. There's some deterioration for women more recently, particularly the less educated, particularly people who say have only a high school education. And one of the things immigration is doing is it's holding down wages. There's some crowding out. I'm not arguing they're stealing jobs. That's a silly straw man argument as well. But I am arguing it's letting us ignore this problem. If we didn't have access to all this immigrant labor, employers and the American people, American society, would demand that we try to reinstill the value of work. Raise wages was one of the most important things to make work more attractive. Immigration lets us not do any of that, including the current massive flow of illegal immigration.
And Dr. Camerata, it's sometimes said that illegal immigrants only take jobs that Americans don't want. Can you respond to that claim? Is it true that American workers don't compete with undocumented workers?
As I said, most Americans are more educated, don't compete with illegal immigrants. But even if you were to look at the 24 occupations where we think illegal immigrants are most concentrated, there are nearly 6 million U.S.-born Americans in those same occupations. And it's just construction labor and building, cleaning, and maintenance, right? And there's at least 2 million legal immigrants in those occupations. The overwhelming majority of workers there are U.S.-born. So the idea that if you have a majority of people being U.S.-born and somehow Americans don't do that work is absurd on its face.
And with the remaining time I have, I'd like to turn to Mr. Law. When I visited the southern border, I met with Border Patrol agents. I visited the unaccompanied minor processing station. I'm very concerned about the more than 300,000 children that have come alone to the United States. And on top of this, according to the New York Times, the Biden administration has lost contact with nearly 100,000 of these unaccompanied minors. as far as you know, is the Biden administration doing anything to address this issue?
No, they're not. They're actually making it worse. And this just goes to show that when you have an open border in a volume that is unsustainable, you cannot keep track of it, whether it's the unaccompanied alien children or single adults as well. If you're allowed into this country, this administration is losing track of you one way or the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.